Live from Gladstone in Queensland, this is Strong Australia. Now, Helen Dalley.
Good evening, I'm Helen Dalley. This is Strong Australia, coming to you live from Gladstone on Queensland's mid-north coast. We're at the Gladstone Yacht Club tonight for a joint Business Council of Australia and Sky News event to get away from the boardrooms of Sydney and Melbourne, Parliament House in Canberra, to get away from our studio to talk to Australian businesses, big and small, in the heartland about the issues that matter most to them. Now, we're in some of our most prosperous and thriving regional hubs. We wanted to get a view about the opportunities and challenges that they face, but also to highlight what they give to our wider economy. And Gladstone sure is a thriving hub. Massive LNG trains, exports to Asia, coal, alumina, agriculture, the list does go on. To show you a little taste of what's been happening in Gladstone and the sort of investment and development that has taken place here, but taken place here alongside the southern end of the Great Barrier Reef, Sky News filed this story. Take a look.
Things that people need to appreciate is that Australia is an island continent and 99% of our traded goods travel by ship. So ports are essential to Australia's wealth and prosperity, and the Port of Gladstone is really essential for Queensland. It is Queensland's largest trading port, and it is the essence for the development, the economic development of central Queensland. It is the main significant piece of economic infrastructure in central Queensland. Yes, well, the LNG industry is just a clear example of what Asia is doing to help our economy in Australia. There's a significant growth in demand for LNG, and what's happened in Queensland is we've established the first LNG industry based upon coal seam gas. It's the first time in the world that coal seam gas has been turned into LNG and exported. So it's a world-first industry, and from 2006 to 2014, a number of companies started the process of developing that process of harvesting the coal seam gas, sending it to Gladstone and then processing it into LNG.
Well, I sort of look at it from my perspective that I started back in 2008. The throughput trade was around 77 million tonnes. At present, last financial year, we did 120 million tonnes. So that's nearly a 56% increase over that 10-year period. So just to see the development of the areas that have been provided and created, plus even the vessel movements, we're now sitting close to 1,900 vessel movements in and out of the port each year compared to the 1,300 10 years ago. So I think the port's in a good, strong position from a throughput perspective, and there'll be steady growth as we move forward. So the port's been a great social partner in regards to apprenticeships and trades, working with a number of organisations to facilitate that training and development. As I said, being in a smaller organisation, there is a lot of advantage in being able to gain different skills and experiences in projects, and I think that's what the port tries to create.
My duties are when I'm sitting at the control panel, you're in charge of the train, so you communicate with the train, you get the train speed right, you've got to get the tonnage, so you get a nice even flow so you don't block chutes with spikes, etc. You also control the tripper, which actually puts the coal on the stockpile. That's where it comes out of. It's a movable piece of machinery. And you also talk to the dozer drivers to make sure everything's safe, so you've got cameras on everything. You've got to regulate everything, the train speed. You've got to communicate with the train driver, the dozer drivers, upstairs. You've got to answer the phone. So you've got two ways on the phone that's happening, and you've got to watch all the screens at the same time. So it can be quite hectic at times.
The Port of Gladstone's inside the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Area. It's not inside the Marine Park, which is outside of the port limits. And obviously, we, on a number of levels, look to ensure that our port activities are undertaken in a manner which ensures that our harbour is not just kept in a good environmental state, but it's also a great recreation and fishing harbour for Gladstone. There's a significant seafood harvest in terms of banana prawns and mud crabs that come out of Gladstone Harbour, and they today remain at better levels than they were 25 years ago. The value of trade for Gladstone Harbour today is around $25 billion. By 2020 it'll be over $35 billion. And the amount of actual revenue that flows from that back to the government in terms of royalties and taxes and tax equivalent payments is around about $2.5 billion, and that will increase over time. So Gladstone Harbour and Gladstone Port is a significant contributor to the wealth of Queensland and also to the wealth of Australia. We are one of the major trading ports in our nation, and we are the port that's always been focused on our long-term future, the port that's always been focused on the balance between the environment and the economy and our social obligations. And so by doing that and continuing to do that, we'll continue to grow this port, and that will continue to create significant prosperity.
That is what's happening in Gladstone right now. But let me introduce my panel for this evening. On my right, I have Zoe Yujnovich. She is the chairman of Shell Australia. She's also the chairman of the industry group, the APIA. And, of course, Shell is the operator and majority holder of LNG. There's quite a few here. Zoe, welcome to you. Thanks for being with us.
Helen. It's a pleasure.
We also are joined by Leo Zussino. Now, Leo is the chairman of the Gladstone Ports Corporation. He is also the chairman of the relatively newly formed Gladstone Development Board. And lastly but not least, we have Grant King, who is the president of the Business Council of Australia. Grant, welcome to you.
Thanks.
Welcome to you, Leo. Can we start by, we've set the scene pictorially. I just would like each of you to set the scene about what you're on about here in Gladstone. Now, the BCA, what is Strong Australia? Why are you even out here, Grant? And what is this relationship between very big business and small and medium-sized businesses in the regions?
Well, thanks, Helen. It's great to be here with you tonight, and it's great to be in Gladstone. 3 points to make in answering your question. The first is a general point, but I think many people feel that a lot of the important policy decisions that are made that affect our lives every day are made in the CBDs of Sydney and Melbourne and Canberra, as you mentioned in your introduction. And of course, that's not where a lot of Australians are. 30% of Australians live in regional Australia. But more importantly, many of the things that we take for granted every day, when we turn the switch on and the lights go on, when we get in our cars, the aluminium and steel that we use to make them, the beef and the bread that we eat, is all produced in regional Australia. So we wanted to get outside the CBDs, as you said, and with your help, the help of Sky News, which we greatly appreciate, we've been able to do that. So that's the general reason that we're doing these programs, to have a conversation with a broader cross-section of the Australian community. Specifically, why here in Gladstone? Well, what a great place Gladstone is, and that video showed why we would make that statement. I think of Gladstone as one of the great cash registers of Australia, one of the great sources of wealth creation. Leo will have all the facts and figures, but I think Leo told me $25 billion a year of exports go out through the port here in Gladstone, and a whole diverse range of products. So it's a great place to have that conversation here in Gladstone. And thirdly, what Gladstone shows, and again what you see in that video, is that in order to make all this happen, big companies have invested billions and billions of dollars of capital, whether it's coal loaders or LNG plants or alumina refineries, aluminium smelters. It takes big capital to do that, and when big business can compete and attract that capital and make those investments, that doesn't just trickle, but it flows right down that ecosystem to small businesses, medium businesses and small businesses, and creates jobs for Australians, strengthens regional communities, creates diversity in those communities. So we think there's much good on display here in Gladstone. That's why we're doing the Strong Australia, and that's why we're specifically here in Gladstone today.
Yeah, Zoe, you obviously through Shell have a very big involvement with Gladstone, but how do you see that involvement in terms of really being engaged with the community? Yes, you've got a massive LNG plant and whole production set up and export set up at Curtis Island, which is just a bit further up the harbour from where we are tonight. But how do you see your engagement both with the people here in the community and the community of small and medium-sized businesses?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, coming back to the introduction, Shell really is one of the large companies here in Australia, but most of our footprint is, as Grant has described, it's in the rural and regional centres. So I think at Shell in Australia, we've got 25% of our global investments. Shell has now one of the largest energy companies in Australia. And it's probably worth putting that in perspective. Our contribution's the equivalent to 115 Sydney Harbour bridges, or 45 MCG grounds, to give you the sense of the sort of scale of investments that we're really talking about. In terms of contribution to GDP for individuals, it's about $1,600 per head. Or in terms of household consumption, that's somewhere between 6 to 12 months of your grocery bills per annum that Shell in Australia is contributing to our households in real living standards and improvements. As you take that into a place like Queensland, where we've worked collaboratively with both sides of government, with our local communities, with our business partners, and we've been able to invest about $30 billion in our facilities here, and we've had something like 21,000 jobs that we've been able to create. And whilst the construction boom is a big part of this, we're talking about jobs for 4 decades. These are multi-generational jobs. These aren't just jobs that come in the construction boom today, but the operations, the maintenance, the projects that come along with our assets really provide jobs and opportunities for our kids. And so I think the contribution we make is really an example of which is here in Gladstone.
Yeah. Leo, we're hearing the big corporate view of Gladstone. We've seen on the footage the extraordinary development that's happened here in the last, well, really since the 2008, 2009, many of the decisions were made, and then gas was starting to be exported 2014, something like that. How do you see this interplay between what you're trying to achieve in Gladstone to make it a sustainable, long-term industrial hub, tourism hub, and what big business is doing too?
Well, the type of industry that we're in, because we have always leveraged off our strengths, which are our harbour and our resource-rich hinterland. And so the demand for our resources in Asia has grown significantly over the last 4 or 5 decades. And what you really do need big companies to actually invest the money in the infrastructure, in the facilities to allow those exports to take place. So there is a really strong relationship between multinational companies and Gladstone. There is a proliferation of multinational companies who are based in Gladstone, and at many times this has been the largest investment centre for Rio Tinto. It's a significant investment centre for ConocoPhillips, for Shell, and for BHP and Mitsui, etc. So we've always benefited from that scenario, but what we have always intended to do and really seek to help educate the multinationals that we're on a pathway of sustainability. We want to have economic growth and economic prosperity, not just for ourselves but for the state and for Australia, but we also want to do that in an environmental framework of sustainability and a social framework. So as you would have seen today, one of our parklands here is a result of a significant contribution of $35 million from the coal industry. We have the football field in Gladstone is a contribution from the coal industry. We've actually leveraged some money out of the gas industry to continue our parkland developments. So we look to achieve those outcomes and also really impress upon the multinationals that Gladstone has a lot of resources in terms of its human resources and its capabilities, and they really need to look to us to allow our community to benefit from their presence in our city.
So in a sense, I guess we're talking about there is this sort of codependent ecosystem that works between you both. You clearly need the capital that comes from major corporations, major multinationals, but then you need to be able to be given the wherewithal to jump off and do some of your own thing to make it a long-term sustainable proposition and to engage a lot of local businesses.
Well, we set the framework as we always have done for many years, and we've always understood that in Australia, regional development is not about looking for government handouts. It's about framing a strategic future based upon your strengths, and then working with government and with industry to actually benefit those, to harvest those strengths and turn them into real prosperity. Yeah. And so I think that obviously when industry comes to Gladstone, we do a good job of actually trying to educate them about how things are done here. And soon I think they find out that there's a benefit in that because we have a lot of knowledge. We want them to be here. We want to help them to be here, and the community does. Very welcoming of industry. And one of the things, Helen, that really disappoints us is that there are people who've portrayed Gladstone as a dirty old industrial city. Now, we are the most air monitored city in the country. We're the most harbour monitored
the port in the
Okay, well, tell us
country.
just a bit more about this. So you have very strict environmental monitoring?
We do.
Because you do have a lot of heavy industry around here.
And it's on our websites. And so when you look at the air monitors in Gladstone, any day, compare them to inner city, Brisbane, Sydney or Melbourne, Gladstone's air is far cleaner than those big cities and those people who are sitting in their lounge room saying it's dirty old industrial city of Gladstone. We're not. We have really, really worked hard to build a premium manufacturing centre in an environmentally sustainable way, and I believe that we've achieved that. And one interesting factor, we did the largest dredging project in Australia, which got us a lot of bad media. A lot of environmental groups used that dredging project basically to try and stop the LNG industry. But recently we have just received a report from the CSIRO, which is a post-investment review of that dredging project. And the CSIRO report, which will be released soon, basically says we achieved the largest dredging project in Australia with minimal impact upon the environs of Gladstone Harbour.
All right. I wasn't going to talk about this right now, but let's jump ahead, Grant. I mean, you've got to engage with the community and to be able to say, we're not dirty. Fossil fuels, of course, have carbon emissions. They do have some consequences for the environment. But the sorts of things your member companies are doing and that Shell's doing, do you think you've really moved a long way to help communities understand that you do take environmental and social concerns very seriously?
So, again, that question exists at two levels, Helen. Clearly there's a global concern about carbon emissions and climate change. That's a global issue. It's not a local issue in a sense, it's a global issue. I think I can say that overwhelmingly the members of BCA support action in that regard, and initiatives like the National Energy Guarantee, for example, which include recognition of pathways is an important part of that. But importantly, at a project level, and I can recall going back to the days when these projects were consented, the community action plans were right up front and centre in these projects. So the commitment of funds to support community activities and improvements and to integrate and engage with the community were an important part of these overall projects. And Lewis referred to that. He talked about some of the developments that are funded by the coal industry and the gas industry. They were right up front. They were right out there up front as part of the approval processes. Not brought along or dragged along at the back, but right up front, because engagement with the community and recognition that these large projects had an impact on communities and people's lives, therefore we needed to work with the communities, work with councils, was right there up front on these projects.
Yeah. Zoe, how do you see this question?
Yeah, you touched on a really important point, and I think one of the things we've done really well is work directly with our communities in consulting them in how we best develop our industries. But I think what we've learned is that it's not just about the communities that we're operating in, but the sustainability of our industry is linked in large part to a lot of the epicentres of broader Australian development like Victoria and New South Wales, where we're very distant, and whilst the benefits flow to a lot of those regions, they're not as visible or as tangible. And so clearly we need to get that message into the lounge rooms of Australia, into the train stations, into the coffee queues, and absolutely onto that 60 square centimetres of screen, which is where so many people are getting their information. And I think historically we've been a little shy to actually put out those facts. We're incredibly proud of the industry that we've created, and many of our regional communities are strong advocates of the way in which this development has helped them stimulate economic livelihood. And take agriculture as an example. Many of our landholders now have income that comes throughout the cycles, which is a great opportunity coupled with some of their agricultural developments. But we really have to continue to take that conversation to the areas that historically we haven't been as active in communicating with.
And I guess coal seam gas has been a perfect example of perhaps where the industry got overwhelmed by community concerns, certainly in New South Wales and other parts of Australia. You've been doing it in Queensland. Do you think you can win that battle on coal seam gas and how to do it in New South Wales without worrying farmers and without worrying people who are concerned about water tables?
Yeah, I think obviously the best test is to talk to the farmers that we're interacting with today. I mean, we recognise that our social licence is earned in every single interaction that we have, and it's as important as ensuring that the particular way that a farmer would like us to engage with them and on their land is managed in every moment, in every sort of interaction. So our experience has been we've learned an enormous amount in the development of the coal seam gas industry. And now in Queensland, I think we've really developed best-in-class interactions. And it's across the industry. We've recognised this is not an area we compete with each other in, like safety, for example. It's an area we really collaborate to try and share best practices, because it's in all our interests to really make sure that that social licence is really well understood with local farmers and local communities.
Yeah. Leo, sorry, Grant.
I was just going to add to those comments, just two concrete examples. The LNG industry with the CSG production, for example, uses the world's largest electric motors to drive its compression. In years gone by, it would have used gas turbines. Zero emissions from electric motors, much quieter. You would not believe how sound travels in farmland. So there's one very practical example of a significant choice about plant and equipment made on social and environmental grounds. And of course, to add to Zoe's point, any water produced in any area that can be value-added, used in a value-added application, is done so. So water produced industry is used in agriculture, enhances agricultural production through irrigation. So there's ended up being quite a symbiotic relationship between farming communities where the gas is produced, and of course that gas being then compressed and brought here to Gladstone, and then, as Leo's mentioned, the efforts made in Gladstone to again integrate the activity in the community and engage the community in what we're doing.
Yeah.
And Helen, when the gas industry was being developed in Gladstone, one of the first things we did was we commissioned a $300,000 social infrastructure strategic plan for Gladstone, and out of that came the priorities that met the needs of Gladstone, and then we took them to the LNG proponents and said, look, this is where you need to put your money, and in collaboration with that, they just kept on ticking them off. And so that was a way that we actually led them to the right solutions to help the community in the process of their development.
There'll be people sitting at home, maybe in the southern states, saying that's all very well, but this town sits on the coast of the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef. All these ships are going somewhere near the Great Barrier Reef, and fossil fuels are hurting the environment. So are fossil fuels killing the Great Barrier Reef? We just saw the pictures. Did you fake them up? Did you colour them in with our cameraman and make them look all nice?
Well, what you're talking about here is really a global issue. And one of the things that a lot of people in their lounge rooms don't understand is that the amount of coal we're burning today in the world is an issue. It's twice as much as we were burning 30 years ago because of China. And the International Energy Agency forecasts, because what people don't appreciate, there's going to be an increase in energy consumption in the world of about 30% over the next 2.5 decades. And the amount of coal we're going to be burning in 2040 in the world, because primarily of Asia and Southeast Asia, is not going to be much different to today. So if the world doesn't do something about how it burns coal cleaner, and that's where the environment movement stands up and fights and says no coal, well, no coal's stupidity, because no coal is never going to happen. The fact is, those people will use the coal, as we did, to actually take them through that development phase, to actually give their families, and today...
All right, is our fossil fuels hurting the reef?
I don't know if they're hurting the reef, but the fact of the matter is emissions from cars, transportation emissions from power stations, emissions from a whole lot of range of areas. And, like the emissions from coal are around 22% of the global emissions. So we don't concentrate on the emissions from mobility and transportation, which are significantly higher. We need to concentrate on all those emissions to achieve the outcomes. But what I'm saying is the debate on the left and the right, where it becomes ideological, is not the debate that we really need to be having. Like Gladstone, we can stand proud because the vast majority of our coal is actually metallurgical coal that goes into making steel. That is in great demand in Asia. But in Australia and in Queensland, for example, we actually contribute 0.6% of the greenhouse gases of the world.
All right, I just want to get a response from Grant about this idea about the Great Barrier Reef, which Australians, of course, adore.
Yeah, well, it's not just what Australians adore. I mean, internationally, the Great Barrier Reef is one of the great icons of Australia. Look, there's a couple of additional points to what Leo's made. I mean, the natural gas produced in Queensland and shipped mainly to Asia and significantly increasing volumes to China is substituting for coal. And I don't think there's any question about that. So the carbon intensity of energy production, certainly when it's used as a thermal fuel, is less because of the exports that are occurring out of Gladstone. So there should be no debate about whether it's causing more or less damage. It's less because of the carbon efficiency, the very low carbon content of gas. So I think that's pretty clear. Australian thermal fuels and metallurgical coals are some of the highest qualities, which means relatively lower carbon efficiency than other choices in the world. So I think at the end of the day we can say if the world chooses to use these resources, then supply of these resources from Australia is a good thing and something that we should be doing and doing, I think, with confidence that it's the right thing to do. Of course, the other aspect is much more local. I mean, is transporting this stuff through the reef, creating a risk for the reef? And the answer to that is no. Navigation, all of those things are very, very well managed.
It's been quite an extraordinarily safe industry, isn't it?
Well, if you go back to your first question, the
investment... In terms of shipping LNG?
Yeah, well, the investment that this industry makes in safety and containment, everything works and nothing leaks, is extraordinary.
All right.
So I think we can say this industry is not damaging the reef in any way. If anything, it is helping improving carbon emissions on a global basis.
We are going to take a very short break, but our panel will be back with me. We'll be back after this break with more from Strong Australia, live in Gladstone.
Filled with indulgence, Lindt creation blocks from our master chocolatiers. Sumptuous orange, heavenly creme brulee, or divine hazelnut. All enrobed in the finest Lindt chocolate. Which will you give into first? Creation from the Lindt master chocolatier.
Get to Godfrey's, don't miss out, it's all gotta go! Hoover 2-in-1 stick vacs just $89. Electrolux now just $188. Carpet shampoo is less than half price. Philips bagless a red hot $129. And steam mops just half price. It's all gotta go, but only at Godfrey's.
As a young child, I was always dreaming of these far-off places. Through Ancestry DNA, I discovered my family originated from Scotland, northwest Russia, and even the Iberian Peninsula. Looks like we were quite the nomadic type. It's definitely going to affect where my next travels are because there's so much of the world to see. Now I know why I am like I am.
Order your kit today at ancestry.com.au.
If you leave your car at home and ride your bike to work, you could be paying for kilometres that you just don't need. Hey, off you go. Save up to $220 with Pay As You Drive. Go online and search real car insurance. Drive less, save big.
Time, visit OPSM and receive $100 off Ray-Ban frame and Ray-Ban lenses when purchased as a complete pair. Further terms and conditions apply.
Soundproof apartments, traditional homestays, child-friendly villas, millions of homes and apartments to choose from. Book your next story.
Who knows where to find amazing deals on the best luxury hotels and resorts anywhere in Australia or around the world? Who knows where to find top boutique accommodation quickly and easily? Who knows? Huno.com does. That's HUNO.com. At Huno.com you can search, compare and save on the finest hotels for your next holiday. And with friendly support, it doesn't get any easier than this. Try Huno. It's simple. Find your next hotel on Huno.com.
So I bumped into this guy and it turns out he's an electrician. But I lost the business card that he gave.
Did you try Googling his name?
And nothing came up.
Nothing?
No results. No website.
You sure he even exists?
I mean, I'm not sure about anything anymore. Maybe he's like...
a ghost?
Big on comfort and space. Renault Koleos from $31,990 drive away.
There's now a better way to protect yourself from frequent heartburn. Nexium 24-hour. For 24-hour protection to control frequent heartburn. Just one tablet a day, 24-hour protection for frequent heartburn relief.
As your sun sets,
join us for breakfast.
Or indeed any time for a UK take on breaking events.
Business, politics and much more.
People want answers. Always live.
Sky News UK, channel 605.
Hello, Helen Dalley with you back at Gladstone Yacht Club with Strong Australia Live. Now, my panel tonight is the BCA President, Grant King, the Shell Australia Chairman, Zoe Yujnovich, and Gladstone Development Board Chairman, Leo Zussino. We were having a great conversation before, but I do want to move it on because all of us in the country, Zoe, I'll start with you, have been very concerned about all of our gas, that's the feeling, all of our gas is going to LNG exports. East Coast, there's a crisis, a gas crisis, there are shortages, and prices of energy, including gas, are going up. Now,
yeah, indeed.
Is this true? And what are you doing about it?
Yeah, fantastic question. I think firstly to start off with, it's really important that we recognise unless we've got a functioning domestic market for energy, we're not going to have the social licence to continue with a thriving export market. And so I think fundamentally there's a strong recognition that we need to ensure that there is a really healthy supply of competitive opportunities for gas and power in the domestic market. I think if we take a look at how this story has sort of moved a little bit in the past 12 months, there's been quite a lot of work that's been done. From a position when we had the market operator projecting that there'd be significant shortfalls of gas in the domestic market, to the very latest reports released last week where we now have a surplus of gas. Of course, the things that we're trying to do is make sure that any customer looking for gas has the ability to contract gas. We're also looking, however, to make sure that the efficiency through which that gas is offered is competitive so that we can make sure the prices and the affordability of that gas is equally consistent with a thriving domestic market. So I certainly think that we've seen great movement in terms of prices have declined. They've come down from the lofty levels of sort of the $20 per gigajoule down to about the $8 to $10 range. They're definitely currently at levels that are probably lower than an LNG netback, and we're starting to see significantly more competition and efficiency in the market, which I think is a good definition of competitive supply to the manufacturers or indeed to our retail customers.
Yeah. Grant, how do you see this? Because, I mean, obviously a lot of the LNG exporters, you've all had, when you were at Origin as well, you all had locked-in contracts years ago, so you can't renege on those. But as we all know, there's been a great debate about, well, why should it all go to exports when we used to have loads of gas here?
So there's a couple of important points to make, Helen. The first is, as acknowledges Zoe's done, that gas prices are higher than they were, quite a bit higher than people were used to, and that is the case and has to be acknowledged. But as is also the case in many situations, that's a function of supply and demand. So when the decisions were made to invest in these LNG plants, there was an expectation that the industry would have access to supply, and supply would grow, in proportion to that growing demand. That access didn't materialise in the way that people hoped. That was reflective in part of political decisions, as much as economic problems. Because we had moratoriums, New South Wales proved very problematic. In fact, even still today, it's difficult to develop coal seam gas in New South Wales. The Northern Territory had a moratorium that's only recently been lifted. It's not a supplier today, but there's a great hope that it will be a major supplier in the future. So if there's a sort of public policy learning out of this, is that you can't have a growing demand and a contracting supply. Contracting meaning reducing supply. So I think that's now understood. I think we understand that the popularity of many of those that oppose the development of fossil fuels, for understandable reasons in terms of climate change, but perhaps misunderstanding the nature of the industry here in Australia, has held the industry back, held back the expansion of supply, And it's only through that expansion of supply that we will see, I think, an even greater competition amongst resources. And Zoe's absolutely right. I think everybody in industry knows that the domestic market comes first. I don't think there's any... when I talk to people in industry, there's no doubt about that.
Do you think there's any extra responsibility on, say, the exporters, or Zoe, I'll ask you this too, to say, well, actually, we can't really export at all. If it's a decision in New South Wales not to have extra supply, we're going to have to keep back some of our exports, because that trigger that the government could do is still on the table, isn't it?
Well, Zoe's quite rightly said. I don't think Zoe's aware, and I'm not aware of anybody who hasn't got gas they were seeking. I am aware of a lot of people complaining about the price of gas that they're getting, and there's a very significant difference. And that difference in part is a difference that in many other aspects of Australia we've got used to, because we're an exporting nation. And as I perhaps said earlier in an earlier discussion with you, whether it's our beef or our lobsters or our wheat or our iron ore or our coal or our gas, we pay the export prices. And that adjustment can be difficult. And again, we have to acknowledge that.
And they're often world prices too. I mean, obviously LNG is a world price.
So it's that adjustment that's been difficult, but it's that adjustment that has led to $70 billion of investment here in Queensland, countless thousands of jobs, and of course, ultimately, royalty revenue for governments and access payments for farmers, for example. So that value is being spread around the community, but in a different way than occurred before. But we've just got to go back to access to resource, access to supply, and encourage and continue to encourage investment. I know Shell and Zoe know they talk about it, but Shell's investing a lot in growing supply here in Queensland.
Do you feel you can guarantee the farmers of New South Wales that, it can be safely coal seam gas if it was you or one of the, obviously Narrabri?
Certainly I'd say our experience in Queensland tells us that we can do this very collaboratively in a way through which everyone prospers as a result. And indeed, if you look at Australia, to Grant's point, it's not just Queensland that's prospering here, but the Australian country broadly is prospering as a result of the activities here. I think as we take a look at domestic gas, sort of quite specifically, Queensland has actually been a significant support and help actually to the domestic gas market. So if I look at Shell, for example, prior to export scale, we were producing, say, 20 petajoules of domestic gas. Today, we're 5 times that contribution in domestic gas because the export scale is such that you can afford to develop significantly more gas fields. And so today, we're about 40% of the Queensland domestic gas supply, we're about 15% of the East Coast domestic gas. And we didn't need the government to tell us to divert cargoes. We were very proactive and on the front foot in ensuring that we've really got to make sure that the domestic gas and the volumes are available in the market.
I do want to just move on because we're going to run out of time. And Grant, you were asked some questions by some of the local business people and family people, parents today about this really fundamental question of, with technology increasing, obviously we're not going to stop that, and in many ways it's good, robotics, AI, will there be jobs for our children, all of our children in all communities, cities and regional areas, and where will they be? What do you say to this, and what is the BCA thinking about this?
Look, I actually think that's the biggest policy issue that in the BCA we think about, and of course it's, in my view, one of the biggest policy issues for the whole Australian community. Will we create the jobs, the meaningful jobs that will pay the wages, that support the life that we're all used to here in Australia? And it's very difficult today to say that in 30 years the jobs will be A, B, C. We just don't know. And so it sounds like a very difficult question to answer. But we do know a couple of things, and that is the value of education. I think I saw a statistic last week that in the US, 99% of people who'd been employed in the last 15 years had secondary or tertiary education, vocational education or university education. So getting people access to education is absolutely critical. But more so, we've got to change from that view that at 18 you leave school and you go to college or university, at 22 you're educated. That's got to change. We've got to spend our life training and retraining. So access to lifelong learning has to be a significant change in the way we educate people. It's particularly evident also in regional areas of Australia, for example here in Gladstone, that the nature of work is a bit different in regional areas. It's a bit more vocationally oriented, it's more skill and trade oriented, and I think we've made a bit of a mistake in Australia in that we've underemphasised the importance of vocational training and the value in vocational training. And so certainly from an advocacy point of view, we in the BCA argue for quite a significant rethink about vocational training and how we're giving people access to those skills and those training experiences, as well as university education. So education, training, innovation, creating the right incentives for people to take risks. The big businesses today were businesses that were small at some point in the past. Our future members may not exist today, but someone will risk some money, they will innovate, and they will grow and they will be successful. They need to be rewarded for doing that.
Leo, I just want a slightly different question on this for you. Australia's obviously been very much boom-bust mentality, particularly in big regional areas where there might be great resources booms, things like that. Now, you did have a big boom in the construction phase of the LNG industry here. How do you see this question of how you can get over that and smooth out the peaks so that you do enable? Just really briefly, how do you get that from either government or policymakers or companies?
Well, I think we get it by again, leverage off our strengths. And again, we look to Asia, and what we see now is, hundreds and hundreds of millions of middle-class Asians looking to go on holidays. And so in Gladstone, we have the Southern Great Barrier Reef in the 1770 region, with beautiful coral atolls sitting 50 kilometres offshore in an area that's two-thirds national parks. So what we're doing now is we're focused very heavily on saying, okay, we've got a manufacturing strategy, and we can talk about that later, about hydrogen, but we're really focused on also saying, let's develop a Cairns of the South. In 1,250 kilometres south of Cairns on the Great Barrier Reef around 1770. And that
because that tourism boom is just going to keep going on in terms of what you could have from Asian tourists here?
Yes. Well, someone said recently that two-thirds of the middle class in the world now reside in Asia. And the Chinese tourism is 1.1 million last year. The Tourism Commission's forecasting it'll be 3 million within 5 years. And again, all the rest of the Asian middle class. The Great Barrier Reef is the icon that they want to see. In the Southern Great Barrier Reef, we have that so much better than anywhere else on the reef. And so what we need to do is to exploit that with good infrastructure, good strategic planning, and we can have growth in that area, providing thousands of jobs for people in an area completely different to our construction and our operations and manufacturing.
Can I just add one thing just to
really briefly, we've got to go to that break.
Dispel a myth, which is that I think whilst the construction boom is over, the kinds of projects built in either LNG facilities are multi-decade, and in fact the backfill and expansion opportunities to backfill these facilities are indeed very significant by any industry standards.
And to maintain them and all that sort of thing, and they require skilled jobs.
That's exactly right.
Sorry to cut you off there, Zoe. We do have to take a break. We're going to have more from Strong Australia in Gladstone right after this break. Stay with us.
My life is spread all over. My daughter is studying in London, and my parents are back in Hong Kong. With my business growing, I'm finding myself away from home more and more. So being able to control my life, no matter where I am, has been fantastic. I can be in Europe, receive the income from my property in Hong Kong, pay my daughter's tuition in London, and exchange currency at great rates for where I'm going next. All from this, my Citi Global Currency account. It just makes my life simple.
Hello, this is David Duke, Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. Yeah. What can I do for? Well, since you asked, I hate blacks, Jews, Mexicans and Irish, Italians and Chinese, and anyone else really that doesn't have pure white Aryan blood running through their veins.
I'm happy to be talking to a true white American.
God bless white America.
Alright, Trivago. Find me a hotel somewhere in Thailand where I can wake up with a view of the ocean. Oh, awesome. And what about a pool for me and my friends? Oh, and a massage. A nice restaurant. And Trivago, my friends love to party. Yes, this is my ideal hotel. Thanks, Trivago.
Pharmacy for Less is Australia's fastest growing discount pharmacy that guarantees more care for less cost. Control cravings with Nicotinell Combination Therapy Pack, $24.99. Neuromol Double Action Temporary Relief for Acute Pain, $4.99. Advil Rapid Relief starts going to work on pain in minutes, $12.99. Vicks Honey and Lemon Menthol Vapor Drops and Cough, $3.99. Best brands, professional service and advice. Pharmacy for Less, we beat any price.
Prices cut again at Toys R Us and Babies R Us closing down sale. Now save 30 to 50% in all stores. All stock must be sold. Toys, games, clothing and more. All brands are on sale. Save 30 to 50% now. Stocks won't last, so hurry in store now for the Toys R Us and Babies R Us closing down sale.
Through Ancestry, I discovered my family have always been connected to the sea. I have Viking ancestors from Scandinavia. An ancestor, Henry Cable, came out in the First Fleet. Another on my mum's side was even born at sea. All my kids surf. It's really about being in the ocean. Now I know why I am like I am.
Get started for free at ancestry.com.au.
You want the most out of every day. You won't let anything hold you back. So when a cold sore tingle strikes, you act on it with Zavirax Duo. New Zavirax Duo is clinically proven to help prevent the blister before it starts and speed up healing time. Act on the tingle with new Zavirax Duo. And because we act on it, you can too. Zavirax Duo, a new breakthrough cold sore treatment. Available behind the counter at pharmacies.
No one does lazy time like us. Bundaberg Rum Lazy Bear, with refreshing taste of dry and lime, now in cans.
I've always wondered what it feels like to be pretty. Are you okay? That's me. Yes? I'm beautiful! I know you don't recognize me. It's me, Renee.
I Feel Pretty. Available August 1 in Foxtel Store.
Coming up on Sky News Real Estate, how to build a profitable property portfolio in a slowing market.
Buying a property is based purely on numbers.
With our guest host, property buyer and investor, Nathan Birch.
Plus live auctions from around the country.
Welcome back to Strong Australia Live from the Gladstone Yacht Club. And it's great to have my panel here tonight. The BCA President, Grant King, sitting with our guests at the Gladstone Yacht Club. Shell Australia Chairman, Zoe Yujnovich, great to have her along. She's also the Chairman of APIA, the Oil and Gas Industry Group. And, of course, Shell is the operator and the major holder of QC LNG, one of the major LNG operators here. We're also joined by Leo Zussino, who's the chairman of the Gladstone Development Board. Great to have you all. We're going to run out of time. Leo, I wanted to ask you, because you do speak for a lot of businesses in this area, what are the challenges that you need to get either help on or you need to overcome to enable you to get to your strategic aims?
Well, Helen, one of our major goals is to be Australia's premier manufacturing location, and the big issue we have now is the cost of energy and electricity. In 2004, Australia was the fourth lowest electricity cost in the world. Today, in the OECD today, we're the fourth highest. And that change has had a dramatic effect upon the ability for manufacturing to survive and to grow. So that's one big challenge, and we're looking at that in many ways ourselves, in terms of looking at the potential new hydrogen industry that we have now have feasibility studies.
The hydrogen industry,
going on, because hydrogen can be the potential for a low-cost energy source and a clean low-cost energy source for Gladstone's manufacturing. The other big issue we face is that we see significant development in the future, and we need to have infrastructure put into place. Now, a lot of that infrastructure doesn't fit the tight Infrastructure Australia business case. But we need...
So you're talking different to the sort of infrastructure that Zoe set up through the LNG plant. You're talking flood-proof roads. These are optimising our shipping channels and doing things like that. So the significant big dollars need to be invested in that.
And the outcome, though, is it creates the opportunity to attract more industry to Gladstone, to our 27,000 hectare state development area, and to utilise our deep water port and help it to grow. So those two big factors are where we are really looking for solutions and working hard with a lot of people to try and come to those solutions.
So you want big business, government, state government, all sorts of people to help you with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Grant, just on the cost of energy, now we've had a big debate around the National Energy Guarantee. The Business Council has been urging MPs, along with other business groups, to back it.
Yeah.
Are you confident that it's going to get through, and why should it? Will it deliver lower prices for consumers and allow us to meet our international reduction in emissions?
Well, as Leo said, the cost of energy and electricity in particular is one of the issues that all of Australia faces, not just the Port of Gladstone, the City of Gladstone. With a long background in energy, I can be critical and say that there's been a series of poor decisions made, frankly, by state and federal governments of all persuasions over the years, because it's only ever dealt with a part of what we need to do. The advantage and the attraction of the NEG, the National Energy Guarantee, is it does bring together both the environmental and reliability aspects that are so important to get right and get the right cost, or the right underlying capital investment, and therefore the right cost structure going forward. So we do urge all governments, state and federal, to get behind the NEG. I'm hopeful that will be the case. There's been false starts before, but the NEG is the most comprehensive plan that's been put on the table. It works within largely the existing market structures, but enhances them with a few signals, if you like, that will drive a better spread of investment and produce a reliable and more competitively priced electricity supply. So get behind the NEG, let's get it done, let's get on with the investments that will produce a more competitive and I think cheaper long-run price for electricity.
Are you worried about Labor holding it back before it even gets to the states?
I have great faith that our politicians of either side will work together and get this done. And look, I think deep down both sides of politics want this matter solved. Frankly, it's been a problem for a long time.
Yeah.
And I actually do think both sides of both of the major political parties want this fixed. Now, maybe there'll be a bit of argy-bargy around the edge, but get it fixed, let's move on.
In our final minutes, I want to bring up an issue that is a big issue, but nonetheless I'm going to have a go. So it's interesting, obviously we have a federal election coming up at some point soon. Now, the Coalition have been trying to get, and the BCA has been pushing it, tax cuts, the second last tranche for big business to get through. They're not able to get it through the Senate. Then they brought in personal tax cuts, and perhaps that may sort of ease the way. But on the other side, voters tend to think, well, why should big companies like Shell, sorry to single you out, but why should big multinationals get a tax cut? The perception is you don't pay enough tax now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you take a stand back, Australians expect us to comply with the spirit, the intent and the letter of the taxation laws in Australia, and we do. If we take a look over the past 5 years, Shell has paid $4.1 billion in tax. But more importantly, over that same period of time, we've invested $50 billion in projects, whether they be infrastructure projects that can be leveraged for other economic gain, and we've employed about 22,000 people over that same course of time. So indeed, we need to make sure that the economic environment that we're working through enables us to attract capital into Australia, so competitive corporate tax rates and so forth really help to backfill more and more capital. But in principle, the work that we're doing, not only do we pay significant tax, but our contributions are just so much larger than that. As we come out of the construction phase and into operations, those tax rates will also increase.
Grant, do you think you're going to get the tax cuts through? And just remind our audience again why it's important that you have a tax cut when lots of Australians aren't going to get theirs for a while in the personal income tax cuts.
Yeah. I can assure you under the government's plan, business will wait even longer than Australians. So on that matter, business is last, not first, to be clear. Look, there's $5.5 trillion of assets, capital assets in Australia. 60% are funded by foreign capital. Australia has to be competitive in attracting that capital. The Port of Gladstone is the best exemplar of that. We talked earlier about the massive investments here. The Port of Gladstone is competitive in all aspects, and it has to also, as a country, we have to be competitive on capital. If the rest of the world, which they are, is reducing their tax rates, we cannot sit back like this and ignore what's going on around us. We have to be competitive. We will not get Shell invested in Australia if it gets better returns in Sarkland, for example, or anywhere else where Shell can operate. They can go anywhere in the world, and so can many other of the major investors in Australia. So, the tax plan is a long-term plan. It's unbelievable that it's 10 years before the full corporate tax rate takes effect. I do believe the economic arguments are well understood amongst politicians. I'm hopeful that the government will be able to negotiate with the crossbenchers and get the necessary support. We're very close, but it is a matter ultimately for government to get that plan through Parliament, through the upper house. But I do believe the arguments are well understood. We must be competitive. If we're competitive, we will create jobs. We will grow. We will invest. We will create jobs, and that's what's best for all Australians.
That's where we have to leave our discussion on Strong Australia. Thank you so much for joining us, Zoe Yujnovich, Leo Zussino. Thank you very much from Gladstone. Great to have you, and Grant King, President of the BCA. That is it for us from Gladstone. But do stay with us, because coming up next on Sky News, Paul Murray Live with Peter Gleeson. Hope you have.